lot of interesting things. The first probably 6 or 7 years of our marriage, we're actually very happy. We had our son early on. My son contracted spinal meningitis when he was 18 months, and he very nearly died. Okay, there were probably 3 or 4 nights in the hospital where doctors told us they didn't know if he'd make it through the night. But he's a tough little guy, and he did make it. And he's 21 now, bigger than I am, and just a wonderful kid. You know, I'm so proud of all the things that he's overcome in his life. He had to completely learn how to walk again. He had to go through just years of physical therapy, and he had a very, very difficult time. 3 years after he was born, my daughter Shelby was born, and I'm happy to say that there have been no problems with her whatsoever, other than maybe a little bit of stubbornness.
June 12th, right?
Yes, sir. Very good. June 12th, 1991. And we actually had a very good life for a while, and then my ex-wife found out that she was being transferred to California. So because it was in the middle of the school year, and Josh had already started school, and I was teaching, we had decided that she would go ahead and go to California, work there for 6 months, and then the kids and I would join her after the school year was over. So it was very difficult at first, but we made it work for a while. But when the end of the school year came and I got to California, I realized pretty quickly that something was wrong. And I come to find out that my wife had a completely separate life from us. She had taken up with another guy she was wanting part of. And when I got to California, rather than be honest with me and tell me what was going on, she led me to believe that everything was going to be just like it was. I dropped everything. I left my job, left a job offer at Lombard North, and basically a great life here in Illinois, to go to California where my teaching certificate wasn't even valid. I would have had to have taken more classes. But I knew that if I wanted to keep my family together, I had to go. So I packed up my kids, everything I had, and we went to California. And pretty much the entire time we were out there, my wife just ignored us. Okay, she pretty much made it known that she wasn't really interested in being a family anymore. And when I finally confronted her, I asked her, if it weren't for the kids, would you even care that I were here? And she just looked me dead in the eye and she said no. And at that point I realized that my marriage was pretty much over. She didn't make a choice. So I said, well, I don't really want the kids living out here the kind of life that you're living. I want to raise them myself. And I said, if you want to fight me, you can, but that's just how it's going to be. And she looked me dead in the eye and she said, we both know they're better off with you. That was it. So I got plane tickets, brought the kids back here. Well, the time that had elapsed from when I left for California to when I came back, if you know anything about the teaching profession, they like to fill the jobs as early as possible. So by the time I got back in August, all the teaching jobs were gone, including the job that I left, the job that I had been offered with Lombard. So I pretty much had to move back in with my mom and dad. And I had no money. My wife had taken everything from our savings account, basically to buy whatever she was doing out there. And she basically left me with nothing. And at that point, I thought that I was going to have to cash in all my retirement money just so I could make it through the next year until teaching jobs came open again. But something happened. And, you know, a lot of people will discuss about the existence of God and everything else, but, you know, I've always been a Christian, and this really strengthened my belief in God. I felt like He was watching over me, because when I had applied for the job at Lombard North and they had offered me the job and I had to turn it down before I left for California, well, a teacher in the district had died suddenly from cancer. And so they called me, and actually the teacher at that school called the other department chairs, and the department chair who had interviewed me said that I happen to know of a young man who's looking for a job, and I offered him a job earlier and he turned it down. And so she gave her my name, they gave me a call, and I went up and I interviewed for the job. Now at this point, I'd been living with my mom and dad for about a month, and my savings were down to nothing. I didn't know what I was going to do, but during that month, I had spent pretty much every spare minute that I had reading self-improvement books, motivating myself, telling myself that I would never allow that to happen again. And So when the time came, I was ready. So I interviewed for the job. That looks good. I interviewed for the job, and I'll tell you something funny about the interview. When I went in, it's kind of actually similar to this speech. I went in expecting the principal to be a man, the assistant principal to be a man. You know, I was going to talk to him about football and, you know, really get in good with him. And every single person in the room, there were 3 people, a principal and 2 assistant principal, or assistant principal and the department chair, all women. 35 hours. And I got to the top of the salary scale. And as far as I know, that's still a record. And after I got that, my salary increased from the time that I started on my master's to the time that I got to 45 hours, which is about 3.5 years. I think my salary increased about $22,000. And that's on top of what I was making to begin with. So suddenly, I actually had money to do some things. And I started saving as much money as I could. And it's funny because I had not planned on buying a house for another year. I had saved some money, but I didn't think I had as much as I wanted for a down payment. And I was goofing around on the internet one night. It was like Saturday night at midnight. And a picture of a house came up, and I just fell in love with this house. I can't explain what it was, but I just fell in love with this house. It just was beautiful. And I called the realtor the next day, and she took me over. And at the time, I just figured, well, we'll just go look at it. You know, it's a dream at this point. I'm not going to be able to buy the house. And it was kind of like the perfect storm. Everything just fell into place. But it was one of those things where it was about 2 weeks before school was about to start. And we actually ended up moving in the Friday before the first day of school on Monday. So my parents came up, all my friends got together, and they helped me move into that house. And my mom and dad stayed with us for a few days to help me get things in order. And I was actually able to get the kids into school and get them started on that day. And I actually started school on that day myself. But at that point, I didn't even care. I was so happy to have the house, to be where I was, to have Bob as a neighbor. You know, my life was just, at that point, I was just about as happy as I could be. And the things that I used, at the time when I was going through the toughest time, I kind of made a little list of rules for myself. And I thought, you know, I should just put these down and just make sure I adhere to these. And every time things get really, really tough, just go back through this list of rules. And this is kind of like my mantra. This is my guide that I'm going to go by. And that's really what I ended up basing the old guy rules on. Okay. Even after moving to the house, okay, I dated, and I didn't really find what I was looking for. I actually did have a brief marriage that didn't work out, and after that I thought, that's it, I'm done, it's over, 2 marriages, forget it, swearing off women. And then my wife just popped up out of nowhere on the internet, and that's another time when I thought the big guy's helping me out. He's looking down on me, and ever since then, my life has just been just a wonderful ride. It's been great. And so a few years ago, a lot of my friends know my story, and they know that I spend a lot of time working out and keeping myself in shape and things. So, a lot of them said, why don't you sit down and write a book? Why don't you tell people what you went through and how you did it and that type of thing. And so I thought, well, I'll write a book, the old guy rules. I'm getting older now, I'm headed into the second half of my life, and maybe this is something that, people can look at and maybe benefit from. And one thing that I learned while I was going through all this, the years that I spent raising my kids by myself, is that when I first started, I thought I was the only one in the world who was a single parent, especially a single dad. You hear about single moms, but I thought I was the only one in the world going through my specific set of problems. And one thing I realized as I started talking to people, there are a lot of people going through that. There are a lot of people who are single parents. There are a lot of people who have difficulties in life, things that dwarfed what I was going through. And I thought, maybe if I wrote a book like this, people could look at that and say, things aren't so bad.